Best game you've ever seen? Best final you've ever seen, rather?
Most intense. It's hard, isn't it? Because not trying to get too carried away, but it's just happened. So there's a lot to go through and there's a lot to talk about. And it was a brilliant game. So it's easy to say the best final. It's one of the best finals I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It is. Whether or not it's the best, we'd have to go through the archives, having played in a few as well. And they're generally quite close, aren't they? So it's a difficult one to unpick. I think when time passes, we could potentially say it was the best final we've ever seen, but it's definitely up there. And there's a load of reasons around that. So you've got La Rochelle, the current champions, against Leinster, who were in the final last year. La Rochelle win it, last play of the game. So all the drama around that. It's at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin against Leinster, unplayable, apart from the week before against Munster and a little trip down to South Africa, but unplayable. And we spoke about the pressure last week that Leinster would have been under to win this game. And then you speed forward. What was it? 12 minutes into the game?
Yeah.
Leinster are winning 17-0.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, oh my goodness me. I mean, the atmosphere and the energy watching at home and watching on TV was unreal, which we kind of thought that it would be.
And
the French travel well.
Being there, it was, mate. It was the most intense atmosphere I've ever seen in the stadium. And
this is what I mean, right? I'm going to go back and forward a little bit on this because rugby is in a weird place at the minute. The Champions Cup, some people call it the European Cup, EPCR, Heineken Cup, Champions Cup, whatever it's called, for all the bits and the fractured element to this tournament. And it is at the minute.
It's changing though, James.
No,
for the better.
I'm going to come good. I'm coming good.
Yes.
I'm coming good.
Positivity.
I'm coming good now. When you actually get to the semis, and it's like any tournament, but the semis and the final, it shows you just how strong and how good it is. And it comes down to two teams, and I'm going to say it, with massive budget, getting to the final, star-studded teams, and the quality that we saw out on the pitch. And I say this a lot, the physicality, oh my good, can you say God?
Yeah.
2023?
Yeah.
I'm going to say it. Oh my good God. Absolutely ridiculous. Loved it. But 17-0 down after 12 minutes against the champions. You ain't losing that. Leinster ain't losing that game.
No.
Andrew?
Until there was a few errors. Uncharacteristic errors by Leinster. Two of them, I think, in the first half were huge. And I don't want to be horrible. James Lowe's knock-on, a horrible pass from Jameson Gibson Park, which led to the first try. They turned the ball over. And then a few moments later, Sheehan, who was ridiculously good, it's a loose offload.
Horrible pass.
Yeah, I mean, I get why he's doing it and what he's doing, but it was like, I'll just offload it and it doesn't matter. And then that leads to them kicking through, and it just led to a bit of pressure. Then, La Rochelle end up running back from the goal line dropout and all this stuff. And there was just a couple of very uncharacteristic Leinster errors, which you don't normally see from them when Jim says they're unplayable. But that is then a credit to La Rochelle and the pressure they were putting them under. It's a game of big men, isn't it? And the biggest of the Big Willie, I'm not even going to call him Big Willie, Little Willie, I just did, but Big Willie Skelton. Then you've got Winnie Antonio. Then you've got one of my favourite players, I think, to now have ever played the game, Levani Bottia, who looks about 60. He's probably only about 20.
He does look old.
He probably is only about 25 on his Fijian passport, but my goodness me, he was putting himself about. Suteni in the centres, Dante.
Unreal.
Yeah. Suteni, I'm drinking with his brother on the Friday night, who is 4 times the size of Winnie Antonio. But a great bloke, loves the pod. It was monster men. I was stood right by the tunnel as both teams came out, and I'm trying to get a bit of content or just trying to record it, and I'm just looking at the size of them all. Like, they're freak shows, and I mean that in a nice way. And their power just then took over. Leinster flew out the blocks, as Jim said, played at a pace. And one thing I'm going to say, I had a bit of banter pre-match, hosting a Q&A with Raphael Ibanez, who is now obviously the France team manager, right? Rewind your minds back to 2007, Jim. Leicester against Wasps in the final. Mm. Where did Leicester get done by twice?
Yeah, at the front of the line out. Julian White.
Yeah.
Weren't looking.
You're
Come
right.
on, Whitey.
Here we go.
Switch on.
Julian White wasn't looking at the front of the line out. 2007, 2 tries. Raphael Ibanez scored one of them. Owen Redden, I think, scored the other. And that was the difference in that final, right? Leo Collin Leo Cullen was part of that '07 squad, right? And
For Leicester.
Yeah.
There we go.
You go fast forward 16 years later, and the first try that Leinster score is a very similar kind of carbon copy of what Wasps did to us when I was at Leicester. And it was Weenie Antonio at the front of the line out, and they just floated it over him, opened up that gap, they scored the try. So I just wonder, I want to ask Leo, was that because of what happened to us when he was part of that lineup?
But definitely was. But just on this start, on that start of the game, the physicality and the size of them, and this is quite an obvious statement, isn't it? And this is maybe where you could say, I can see why they dropped off. The physicality, and we can get on to the way that players entered the breakdown and how that was contested and the brutality and the violence around that part of the game. But I just think they did blow a gasket. They went all out, didn't they? You look at the physical, look at James Ryan, the way that he's banging.
That's the big turning point as well.
Scale. Yeah, and that for me is the point I was going to come on to. That was a massive turning point.
James Ryan must definitely listen to the podcast, because you said he got bullied a few years ago. He was bullying boys while he was on there. He was smashing boys. And then it was a really innocuous.
It was a knee.
But it was a knee as he's made a tackle on someone else and someone's running around the corner.
And Bugger Eats hit him with a knee, I think. Just as in completely accidental.
Yeah.
But that was a massive, massive turning point for Leinster. The momentum was shifting. You've got your captain, future Ireland captain as well. Yeah, that was a big point as well. And you mentioned a couple of things from James Lowe as well. Kick going out on the full.
Yeah.
And these are the big moments. But still, 17-0 up. How have they lost that?
Are Leinster chokers?
No. I love my time in Dublin. I want to go back. I don't think they're chokers, right? I mean, the results show that historically they've won it once now in 11 years or whatever it is, and they're everyone's favourites. And I'm chatting to a load of Leinster fans after the game, and they're like, and I said to them, your biggest strength is your biggest weakness. And they're like, the URC. And who was it last week? Was it Cian Healy said last week? They weren't bothered about the URC.
Yeah.
His mindset is everything's about the Heineken Champions Cup final. But to say, we're not bothered about the URC, but their greatest strength is there, and we had Bernard Jackman on here talking about how hard it is to get in to just train on a Tuesday. So these players aren't being tested necessarily week to week to week because they are so good, because they've got so many players. So when you're not tested that much, you get to the nuts and bolts of the competition and you get to these big moments. They're not chokers, but imagine losing 3 games all year. That's all you've lost all year, and you've got no trophies.
That's choking.
Why have you been horrible, Andy? I love everyone in Dublin, and I love.
Yeah, but you're in a different space, Andrew. You have to call it how it is, and
I was drinking with some of the Leinster boys on Saturday night as well.
And I love a lot of the Leinster lads. I do. I love Leo. Like Leo, I would say was a mentor, and he's a great man. I love the bloke, and it is. If you're on one hand calling out referees last week, and he's vulnerable, you don't want to do it. Do you? You don't want to lose any more mates. Maybe that's why. We spoke about last week. So, what do you do if you're Leinster or you're the powers that be? I don't know who they're accountable. And look, this isn't a case of, you need to get rid of Leo. There needs to be a change of guard or whatever. But it is now a thing. We did say last week, if they lost to La Rochelle, and we've got to remember, La Rochelle are the champions. Mm-hmm. They could well have lost. They did lose.
Yeah.
But you have to now start asking questions. That's in the back of the mind. And Andrew, we've been
you're
there.
right. Well, they've never beaten La Rochelle.
It's like,
first and foremost, they've never beaten La Rochelle.
There you go. So
that's a mental block.
La Rochelle and Ireland going to France, and we can get on to that around their mindset. Maybe it's a good thing. And many people are saying that it's a good thing for Ireland going forward to the World Cup, but it is now a thing. And you've been in teams before, and again, we joke about it. When I was playing for Scotland and we'd go 20 points down, 30 points down, 40, like there's no way back. I remember when I was at Saracens and you'd be in games, and even before you put your boots on, you knew you were winning the game.
Yeah.
You were that confident and arrogant, or whatever you want to say, you were that confident. If you're Leinster now going forward, and there is a slight change of the guard with Stuart Lancaster moving on, Johnny Sexton's going to retire, we could potentially see a couple of others that potentially don't carry on playing for Leinster. But if you're Leinster now going into a final, let's say there's a repeat next year of the quarters, the semis, or the final, and you're up against La Rochelle. No one else, just La Rochelle.
Yeah.
You know.
It's very tough. And I'll go back to my time at Leicester. Wasps were our bogey team in finals. We couldn't beat Wasps in a final. And then one year we beat them in the semi-final. But it happens to teams, it really does. And there's a balance of, are they chokers or are they such a good team?
Chokers is more of a nasty word.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I don't think they are necessarily chokers. The tiniest of margins have won these last two finals. The tiniest of margins, right? They were going to score a try at the end, or
Yes.
And the other thing you can say, and I hate being horrible, Ross Byrne was in the same position as Jack Crowley was last week to go for the drop goal, and he saw basically a short side that was under defended, so they went up there and played. And I'll say it, had George Henry Colombe not stayed down, they ain't checking that, because there was loads of clear outs in the game that I'm watching it, I'm like, brutal. And if you slowed, I'm sure Leinster fans will come out with it, you slow down other rucks, you'll see similar sort of challenges. But had George Henry Colombe not stayed down, they wouldn't have seen it, they wouldn't have checked it properly, and Leinster were 2 metres from the line. They could have scored at the death to win it, as La Rochelle did to them last year. And at that top level, it is the tiniest of margins between the very elite, and they're the very elite, those two. They dispatched Toulouse in the semi, and people are like, "Oh, Toulouse are the best team ever." Well, they're not. And it's the thing. So
yeah, your money was on them scoring at the end.
Yeah. And I think they should. I'm thinking it from a tens point of view. Ross Byrne, imagine if he'd have gone for the drop goal and got it. Even if he'd have gone for it and missed it, there was still a minute left. So you go again. But if he'd have gone for the drop goal and got it, you'd have been talking about him as now the Leinster player who has got that monkey off their back and the hero and all this stuff. And the frustrating thing, I think, is they didn't try it. I've been there. I had a drop goal to beat Leinster in a group game at the Mighty Rico Arena. Absolutely spanned it. Last kick of the game. Spanned it, missed it. It was a draw. But at least you put yourself in a position to go for it. And, ultimately, because they didn't go for it, it led to Alatoa's shoulder, which is a red card. And he gets stretchered off. Imagine stretching that off as well. You've got to be strong to lift that on a stretcher, haven't you, Jim?
Yeah.
Goody, you touched on the breakdown just before.
Yep.
It's all they're talking about on Twitter.
Yep.
What did you
Get rid of
guys...
the jackal.
What did you make of it?
Oh, Jim wants to get rid of the jackal. What'd you do if you get rid of the jackal, though?
Andrew, right.
Because we go to Super League, 6 tackles, hand over ball, kick it, and off we go.
I love the jackal.
Yeah.
I love the jackal. I'm looking at the injuries, but also, I'm going to call out my mate here, and it's a good thing. Do you remember Howie Khan? Big shout out to Howie.
Yeah.
When we were at Leicester, he's in South
Screech
Africa.
Powers, we used to call him.
Yeah, of course, yes. He's a good man.
If anyone old enough, Screech, have a look at him from Saved by the Bell.
Saved by the Bell. I wouldn't. Hey, he's got history now. Let's hope that they're not the same now. But Big Howie, best mates with John Dobson. Also, he's one of the head honchos at Adidas South Africa. So give him a big shout out. But he was voice noting me. We were messaging back and forth. And as a casual fan, sorry Howie, you are. He just said that he didn't think the red card was ridiculous, but George Henry Colombe, who got knocked out by Alatoa, what was he doing in that breakdown when you think about it? He weren't jackling, was he? He was kind of just slowing the ball down. He was over the ruck. Now, I'm not saying that what Michael Alatoa did was allowed or warranted. It wasn't. It was a snapshot of what we'd seen the whole game.
But he's just got to put his arm up. If he hadn't took his arm, he'd have been all right.
No, I know. But he's talking about the mechanism of people in that jackal position.
Yeah.
Loosely, and I've kind of piggybacked it.
No.
We saw Ben Curry the week before, snapped his hamstring. He's going to miss the World Cup. And we've gone through the archives on this around the jackal area. People are putting videos and putting clips, and we're going to talk about the breakdown now. If you take out that, what are you losing? Yes, you're losing a compete at the breakdown with that mechanism, with the jackal itself. Do I want to see that? No, because I'm a rugby purist and I loved that part of the game and counter-rucking to the cowsheds and back and being in that position. Are you taking the super strength out of the game of some of the best players of the game, the likes of Richard McCaw, even though he's retired, but you know where I'm going. Josh van der Fleer, Levani Bottia, just to name two from the weekend. Some of the Jack Willis. We could make a list of the players, Rory Darge, Hamish Watson, a load of players that we could go through in that position. I'm talking about injury. I'm talking about some of the contacts that you're seeing around the head. Like, you talk about collisions around the head and stuff. When you're in a breakdown, there's so many that happen in there that you don't see because there isn't one-on-one or two-on-one in the tackle. I'm telling you now that we need to look at the breakdown and what we could do with that. Gregor Townsend mentioned it on here.
Yeah.
One of the greatest coaches in the world at the minute, top 5.
Yeah.
Big shout out, Gregor. That's why I'm saying it, because that at the weekend, and we can go through some of the stuff that we've seen online around the breakdown, it's becoming an issue now, because in order to get rid of people in them positions, you have to be violent.
Yeah.
You have to be aggressive. You have to run in with speed. And let's be honest, and you might not have been there. I've been there a few times in and around that breakdown. I know mates who coach it. You have to be pretty reckless at times as well to clean bodies out. And that's the point in all this.
Yeah. I understand. It's the biggest area of the game. There's more breakdowns than anything else in the game.
Yeah.
And so if you take out the breakdown or the tackle or whatever, you're changing the game immeasurably. And it won't be recognisable to what people love for. Now, I want to bring something into it, Jim. And I've had a listen of the Big Jim show. And what did Martin Anayi say?
He said that was one of the most turning on points.
People get a bit of blood in it when there's a breakdown, apparently, is in a roundabout way.
Who are these people?
Well, they put heart rate monitors on, didn't they?
Superfans.
Superfans. They put heart rate monitors on people, and the spike in when you've seen a turnover, you've seen a jackal, you've seen that sort of thing. That's what people want to see. So I completely agree with you, what you're saying around the injuries and how it is at the minute. I can't see how you can get rid of the breakdown, how you can get rid of the jackal, because it's such an integral part of the game. It's such an acute skill that has massive impacts on your team's performance. So, you're basically taking the super skill off a lot of players if you get rid of it. So, Tommy Rochelle, one of the best in the Premiership at it now. You saw Levani Bottia. Levani Bottia's got a lot of other amazing stuff to his game as well, but there's some players that are just jackal kings, right? You could end their careers. Or they could end their careers in a breakdown or not having a breakdown because they might not get a job again, Jim, because they can't catch or pass. But do you know what I mean? But it's the biggest part of the game. So, yes, something needs looking at, but the players are getting bigger and bigger. And so, naturally, you're going to have to get more and more violent to clear them off the ball sometimes. Or you have to play at a pace that Leinster played at in that first 12 minutes where you can't even jackal. The big point on it is the Leinster fans are raging that Alato has been sent off for that. George Henry Colombe has stayed down. Now, I'm not saying this happened. I can categorically tell you players are coached now to stay down if they think they've been hit on the head. I can tell you that without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, that's what happens in football.
Yeah, right? And so we're going more and more professional, more and more, trying to find the 1%ers of whatever.
Desperate.
Yeah, and there's no way the referee or the TMO saw that without George Henry Colombe staying on the floor for as long as he did and them having to stop the game and all that stuff. And I'm not saying anything about he faked it. I mean, he was up in the celebrations 3 minutes later, but hey, I'm not saying that because he got stretchered off, and that's generally what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that breakdown, there'd have been loads of instances of that sort of clear out in the game. And going back to the referee, Jaco Piper, I agree with Jim's sentiment on what he tweeted. I thought he was all right, but he was all right because he was letting a war go on at the breakdown for both teams. It wasn't like the week before where a different referee was refereeing it one way and letting one team get away with murder but not another sort of thing. But it's, Jaco Piper is a South African. South Africans have entered breakdowns in history, and that's where he's refereed a lot of his ruggers over time in a way that no other nation in the world enters breakdowns, like Exocet missiles. And that's part of the... You should have heard in the stadium the clear-outs and the noise and the excitement off the back of them. So while I completely understand, and Leinster fans are raging because they picked out that one, but once it's been picked out in that way, you can't look away from the fact that that's a red card.
And that is the thing in this, Andrew. Like, you are right. And me and you, I love the breakdown. I love the physicality. I love everything in there. But I need to make another point on it because friend of the show, Dan Levy, his career ultimately was ended having been in that position.
I had a beer with him at the weekend.
Good lad, loose. Good lad. Boy. But as in, we could go through the archives of great players that have picked up horrible, not just career threatening injuries, as in later down the line, as in needing new knees, hamstrings off the bone, horrible injuries in that position.
Yeah.
So everything else is geared towards player safety and longevity and all these things. Yet we are saying that I think that is the most dangerous position to be on a rugby pitch. And again, go back. I love it. I love the jackal. I love seeing that. The warriors, the people that can compete in there. But I'm just saying, I don't know how that's sustainable. And from a refereeing point of view, how you referee that, like Paul Yako Paper, and people be like, "Well, what do you mean, Paul Yako Piper?" You let it go. Just let it go.
He had an open policy, didn't he? Where it was like anything goes, unless it's the most blatant thing you've ever seen in your life. Anything borderline, he was letting go. Side entries into rucks, side entries into mauls, because it was physical monsters going against each other.
Off your feet.
Leinster had their hands on the floor, crawling through and lying on the ball just as much as La Rochelle did. And you could pick out. I could go through that game. GMO Andy, if he wasn't 55 points deep at the weekend, could have gone through that and picked out a million where you could find a penalty at every breakdown. But people that said Yako Piper had a bad game, I actually thought, and this might be controversial, I actually thought Leinster got the rub of the green sometimes.
Especially early on. It was almost like they'd done their homework with Piper.
Yeah, and then obviously, the way it was refereed, and Leinster were, I thought, getting the rub of the green, and then Leinster, very cute, very clever, put Sean O'Brien, the bouncer, on the referee's door so Rog couldn't get in at half-time, which caused a bit of a melee.
Is that what happened?
And yeah, I know. So more onto that, I wasn't aware, only reading the reports this morning, was that the game last season, a similar thing happened, didn't it? So the referee,
apparently Rog got stuck into Wayno at half-time. My mate Wayno Barnes,
yeah.
But, and that's part of, we're at the top echelons of European and Champions Cup rugby, where...
Inches.
Yeah, there you go. It was millimetres at that level. And so, Leinster had thought that, we might need someone just to, not let...
Man the door.
Yeah, man the door for the referee that's a neutral. And Shawnee, and then this is all conjecture until the whole report comes out, but apparently Shawnee O'Brien, a great bloke, was stood by the door so that any of the La Rochelle players or Rog couldn't get anywhere near Yako Piper while he's in his changing room at half-time. A player should never go near it, but you should be able to have a conversation, the captain should, at something. But, yeah, I mean...
Great drama.
Yeah.
Oh, Andy Rowe, it's bloody great drama. Yeah.
I think Johnny Sexton was in the melee. Basically, I think what it boiled down to is Rog and Johnny, they had beef from years ago, and they had a scrap in there at half-time, and they're all still angry. They're just angry.
It's not over. It is now.
It is now. So,
So what happened after the game?
Yeah, well, after the game, emotions are bloody high, right? And I actually spoke to Yako. I had a beer with Yako Piper Saturday night as well. Good bloke.
Oh, I'm sure he is. How was he?
He was like...
was he comfortable being out or not? Or did he feel uncomfortable? Was there any...
He was with all his mates, so all the refs were out. And that's where
Are they all South African or not?
No. I think he was the only South African there, to be fair.
Yeah, if he was surrounded by his mates from South Africa.
No, he's surrounded by all his referee mates. So Tony Spreadbury was there, and who was
hang on.
Spreaders.
Spreaders looking after him.
Spreaders were scrapping. He was ready for a scrap. It all kid. I'll get you, Goody, for coming after my referees. No, then there was Andy Brace. There was the best teeth in town, Turkey Teeth, aka Craig Evans, Whitehouse, Benny Whitehouse, Andy Brace. I was getting maximum daggers from Carl Dixon, but I couldn't really see because there was a lot of people in there. I spoke to him and he said, "You know what, Goody, I've reffed in a lot of games across the world," and he has Super Rugby. And historically, he's a Super Rugby referee, right, and an international referee. He said never in his life has he felt an intense environment like that at the weekend. And you could feel it in the stadium with every decision that's shown on the big screen, and there's a massive amount of Leinster fans. And then I remember in the first half, Kerr Barlow gets absolutely smoked late by Robbie Henshaw, I think it was, stayed down.
Were they showing the replays?
No, not
because they weren't on TV.
No, they didn't show that one. Don't know why they didn't show that one.
But they didn't tend to show a lot of replays of those sort of situations in this game.
Yeah, I think it was, especially in the stadium as well.
It was great.
And I think it was because of the intensity and the feeling in the stadium about how much it was on a knife edge. And so if they'd have shown a couple of things, the place would have erupted. And they did show the Al Alatoa one, and then you ain't got an argument with that, have you? So he said it was, the most intense, and that's the beauty. And we go back to it. I said it earlier in the season when people were questioning the Champions Cup and the format is changing. But everyone's like, I don't know how you're going to qualify or who qualifies or how can you qualify winning one game. You get to the knockouts, and it is the best competition.
Here we go.
Yeah, it's the best competition. And that's what that sort of tribal rivalry and feeling brings to a stadium in a final. And there's no clashes between fans. There's actually more of Leinster and La Rochelle fans singing together and having a good time. But when it's on, it's a war. And the noise in the stadium, whether it was something going against Leinster and the boos or something going against La Rochelle and them trying to boo, it was amazing. And what rugby's all about.
Yeah, so good.
Let's talk about O'Gara.
Go at. Tweeted it. Go at.
Speech after the game.
His
interview.
Just everything. He got voted as the Champions Cup Player of the Decade. If there's anyone that's had a bigger impact on this tournament, as an individual, as a player, as a person, and now as a coach, I'd like to know who it is because, and he's my mate, he gives me a hug before every Champions Cup final. Hold on, maybe not before. He just gives me a hug on Champions Cup final day, whether it's before or after. Maybe I'm La Rochelle's good luck charm. I've had a night out in La Rochelle, it's good as well. What about the scenes? We'll get onto that in a bit. But yeah, I don't think you can speak highly enough of Rog. You look at him as a player and his career, but then what he did is he took himself off to anywhere and everywhere in the world. The easy thing for him, we've seen a lot of people do it. We've got friends that have done it. You finish your career. I mentioned it earlier. Sergio Parise is retiring from Toulon, going straight into the coaching team. Right? Roger's done the complete opposite of that. He could have walked into a job at Munster, but no, he took himself off to Racing 92. Then he went and learnt from the best, who I consider the best in Razor, and spent years being super successful and learning Super Rugby, which again is very different to club rugby over here, even though everyone's like, well, it's just provincial stuff. It's like what we've got here. It's thought of and looked at very differently. And then he's gone to La Rochelle and created this family, this environment, this project that has got a town behind them like no other place I've ever seen, I don't think, in rugby. You name me a town or a city or a team that has that same support. Look at the Port during the game. 4 a.m. in the morning.
Crazy.
They've flown home, landed, and they're all still out. 4 was early for me to go to bed, to be honest, but they're all still out waiting for their heroes to come home. What the project that they've created there and where La Rochelle have come from, I haven't seen anything like that in my life, and Roger's been a monumental part of that. He has... you'd love to play for him. I'm sure you would. Every detail that he brings, but the passion and the thought that goes into everything, you can see it, how he thinks about things. And, he takes his time when he talks, he goes deep, but then he'll pull out a joke or something. The balance on the bloke is just phenomenal. That's why he's the GOAT of European Champions Cup rugby over the years. When it was Europe, now it's the Heineken Champions Cup. South African teams are in it. He's had the greatest impact on the competition. I cannot speak highly enough about the bloke. And he gives me hugs, so I love him.
Pod.
Rugby pod.